Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the AgilQuest webinar for August, part of our Agile Workplace Leaders series of educational lectures and panel discussions from leaders and innovators in the alternative workplace strategy arena. This is all to benefit and support your own workplace programs and plans. For those of you who have joined our prior webinars or listened to one of the archived ones on our website, you know these aren't focused on our hoteling technology, but rather on the techniques and methods for making the most of your program regardless of which vendor you choose. Today's topic is one we all end up facing in one form or another. You built it, but they didn't come, explores the all-too-common situation where multiple critical departments aren't perfectly aligned behind the workplace goals, and we're going to explore some approaches to bringing everyone together and pushing your program forward. We are delighted to have Kyra Cavanaugh with us today, a well-known expert and regular contributor, sharing her insight with us over the next hour. She's the president of LifeMeetsWork, a consulting firm that helps organizations implement and improve workplace flexibility. She provides companies that are striving to be best in class with online membership-based community and services, which include coaching, consulting, and training. She's a nationally recognized speaker on workplace flexibility, telecommuting, and work-life issues, and she's a recipient of the 2011 Work-Life Rising Star Award by Alliance for Work-Life Progress. Having herself worked nearly every possible way to find more work-life balance in full-time, part-time, compressed work weeks, telecommuting, independent contracting, and a stint as a stay-at-home mom, Kyra's made it her mission to help others find flexible work options. Her bottom-line orientation and practical approach drive the work she does with nonprofits, business owners, human resource professionals, diversity and work-life professionals, the Women's Bureau, and the United States Department of Labor. So without further ado, we'd like to turn it over to Kyra Cavanaugh from LifeMeetsWork, today's presenter.
Thank you so much, Doug. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be with you today, noticing some of the people who had registered for today's webinar. It's nice to see that I've got some old friends, some good current colleagues, and look forward to getting feedback from some of those who I haven't talked to before. So welcome, everyone. I'm assuming that if you're here, it's because some aspect of your workplace transformation is less than optimal. For most organizations, for most of us who are leading workplace transformation projects, that's often the case. What I'm going to take you through today is really to very briefly frame the topic of workplace transformation and where things break down in my experience, and then share with you a basic model or approach that I would recommend that you take, that some of our clients are taking, to really start to shore up the gaps in between what you built and how many people actually are coming. So let's talk first about the fact that when I think about workplace transformation, it's everyone's problem and it's no one's problem, and that's the problem. So when you think about, and when I talk to people across IT, real estate, HR, legal, and other aspects within organizations who may be in charge or participating in workplace transformation, I often hear, well, that's not my functional area, or whatever it is that I happen to be talking to them about, usually people-related aspects of transformation, well, that's HR's problem, that's not my problem. On the other hand, we know that our organizations are becoming more and more matrixed, and in some respects, workplace transformation is everyone's problem, right? Whether or not people buy in and participate and utilize the tools and structure that you've put in front of them actually is everyone's problem. Whether it's a people-related issue, a technology issue, a site-specific issue, it affects everybody. So what I have found in a lot of the speaking I've been doing to these various groups over the last year is that because sometimes we think of our roles as functional and sometimes just don't feel like we have the control to be able to handle every aspect of transformation, I start to hear, and that's really why we're here today, about the fact that things aren't getting done or accomplished. So that's why I suggest that that's the problem. Now, that's nobody's fault per se, right? I'm not here to say, oh, well, you should just be more enlightened about your workplace transformation efforts. It's not really that. If we think about how traditionally organizations have been structured, even if we're working on cross-functional teams, each one of us has a functional role. And that role in some organizations can be heavily siloed. So for example, sometimes IT is driving the workplace transformation effort. So when I talk about workplace transformation, let's just all get on the same page. I'm talking about flexibility or mobility. I'm talking about a move to an open collaborative work environment, maybe an effort to reduce your real estate footprint. However it is that you're fundamentally trying to change the way people work is workplace transformation. And oftentimes in organizations, there's somebody who's leading it, right? So it might be a push toward mobility that's being driven by IT. It might be a reduction in real estate, so it's being driven by real estate, and they're spending a lot of time looking at kind of the architecture and the structure and the utilization of space. Other times it's a flexibility initiative or a telework initiative that's being driven by HR. And because one of the functional silos tends to own it, we end up very often in these silos of impenetrable walls. So I'm HR, that means I deal with people and policy. I'm IT, that means I'm in charge of rolling out the shift to a cloud or getting everybody there on the same device or implementing a BYOD policy. For real estate is often defining what are the logistical aspects of how we're going to redefine space. So we end up in these barriers, and yet we know that from a leadership perspective, when we look at what are the leadership competencies that are being called for in the next 10 to 20 years in our organizations, it's about being participative and collaborative, breaking down these silos and these walls so that we can come to a shared understanding of what success looks like. Compounding this issue of silos is the fact that each one of our organizations or the functional places where we play are judged by a different set of metrics. So real estate, for example, has a lot of very specific metrics that they can use to determine, or that you can use to determine what the efficacy is of various scenarios and be able to anticipate that, to be able to look at how many people are accessing VPNs on any given day. In HR, which is where I tend to focus more of my efforts, there are much fewer metrics. We have metrics like turnover and engagement, but those aren't always as hard-hitting, especially for a CFO, as some of the real estate metrics. IT is somewhere in between a lot of times because IT needs resource expenditures and needs to justify those expenditures. So you've got a lot of those metrics, but it also involves a certain amount of investment in order to achieve your IT goals. So not only do we come from a particular place or point of view, but we're also judged by very different things. So if you think about how are HR, IT, and real estate all going to work together, you can start to see that there are a whole set of challenges. As I mentioned, because we're working increasingly in matrixed organizations, and because we know theoretically and ideally we should be reaching out across these silos to talk to each other, some of you may have even tried this. So if you're in HR, you might have said, well, I'm just going to go down and talk to those real estate folks. And I hear many times, and not to pick on the real estate folks, but I hear many times like, whoa, that meeting didn't go as I expected because the way real estate sees the world is very different than HR. And similar sorts of frustrations exist when IT is trying to talk to real estate, et cetera. So what do we do? Understanding that what we really need to be doing is working collaboratively and cross-functionally, at the same time understanding each one of us comes from our own place of strength and knowledge, and we don't always speak the same language. Before I get into the ways that I really think that that you can start to put these puzzle pieces together, I want to share a story with you. Recently, I was speaking to a group of CIOs in the legal field. So they were CIOs for law firms. And I was talking about this idea of the people aspects of technology utilization, right? And so these CIOs are obviously charged with determining what is the best use of the resources they have to be keeping up with the technological changes and supporting mobility and everything else. So as I'm talking to them about the fact that you've really got to be engaging your users and understanding how users are using this technology, one of the CIOs raised his hand and he said, "This is all a bunch of malarkey." And I was like, "Oh, good, there's one in every bunch." So he said, "This is a bunch of malarkey. My job as a CIO is to set out a buffet of technology options and to make those technology options available. So I might implement a social enterprise system, sort of a Facebook for organizations. But once I've implemented it, I'm good to go. That's the extent of my role." And so I pushed back on him and I said, "Well, okay, I understand that you see that that's your role, but what happens if there's sushi on the buffet?" At which point they all sort of looked at me like, "Really, seriously, we're going to talk about sushi?" So I said, "Well, how many of you even like sushi?" And I got out of a group of about 40, I got about 7 hands raised. And I said, "How did you learn to like sushi?" And 1 or 2 people volunteered the fact that somebody, a friend of theirs, had actually introduced them to it. And that was, in fact, what happened with me. I call it a sushi ambassador. If any of us are ever going to like sushi, it's, in my experience, best if there's an ambassador, if there's somebody who says, "Oh, you got to try the eel," or, "Oh, yeah, you've got to move beyond, California rolls and try something else." So I said, who is going to be the sushi ambassador? Who's going to be the technology ambassador in your organization to move beyond just creating a buffet of technology solutions to reach out to the individual people, the people who have to utilize this technology in order for your transformational effort to move forward? Well, he had all kinds of responses for me, which I'll spare you with at the moment. But suffice it to say that the head of innovation for Microsoft recently said in a piece that I was watching on him talking about the future of technology, he said, "I don't want my elementary school children being taught how to build an Excel spreadsheet. The teachers at my children's elementary school have to teach my children the value of creating this data set, using this software to change the world." He said, "Gone are the days where we need to be teaching people about Excel." So that's just one example, and I have examples in real estate about limited thinking, and I have certainly examples within HR about the limitations of siloed thinking. The reason I tell that story is because it's really important for us to think not only about the logistical, tactical aspects of change, but of the people who are engaged in that tactical shift and that logistical shift, and to really think beyond how do we educate them about the tools they're going to have available and start to help them break down the resistance of using those tools, whether it's in real estate or IT or HR. So my point, just like in the Field of Dreams, it's not enough to build it. Just like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams, he builds it. Everybody thinks he's crazy for building this, plowing under his cornfield and building this baseball diamond because he believed that if only he created this, people would come. Well, if you've seen the movie or if you've recently thought about it or are thinking about it now, what happened to Kevin Costner's character in that movie? A lot of people thought he was crazy. A lot of people resisted this vision that he had for the future because they just couldn't see it. So some of you may be feeling the same way. There might have been a lot of energy around launching your workplace transformation efforts, getting approval, getting buy-in, building out the space, or reducing the space, or moving entire locations of people to new offices. And then all of a sudden, crickets can start chirping. Like, wait a minute, why aren't people, moving in and taking advantage of mobility the way we had hoped? Why are they all still sitting in workspaces and not getting out and moving around the campus? Or why is it that we have built, this ability for people to form groups online internally, and yet nobody's really using them? So if that's the case, what I would suggest to you is that we've got to help people get comfortable with change by helping them see that the status quo is no longer going to work. So who are those people that we need to be influencing? I'd suggest, first of all, senior leadership. And that can be difficult because for many of you, if you're embarking on this project, you probably at some point got senior leaders to buy in, got senior leaders to say, oh yeah, here's the budget, or yep, here's the vision, or yep, you've got the green light for the next 3 years to work on this transformation. And so you may think, okay, well, we've got this green light. And yet what we know happens in organizations over a longer period of time is that the shine wears off the dime, right? All of a sudden, some of these leaders start to hear from their managers that there's some discomfort there and start to question this initiative. Or some of your senior leaders may change roles, and now you've got to go back to the drawing board and reconnect with them to sell them in. So when you're thinking about really putting teeth into your transformational effort, one of the things that I would really encourage you to think about is how are you going to repeatedly and on an ongoing basis engage with senior leadership to keep them involved. One and done is not enough. It's not enough to go in once, make the business case, get your budget, and then move on. So what is that feedback loop that you can be creating? How have you been investing in managers? We fundamentally believe that middle managers are what can most obviously and most quickly sabotage any change management effort. So when you look at what you have done so far within your transformation efforts, how are you engaging managers? And we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in terms of how we are suggesting or how we would suggest to you you engage those managers. How are you doing it so far? I want to stop right here. If you have ideas about really ingenious or really effective ways that you've engaged senior leadership or you've engaged managers, I would highly recommend that you share those ideas with us in the chat. If you do that, if you would just make sure to click on in the Send To box, all panelists, then we can all be reading through your chat as we go through here for any best practices that you have found to be particularly effective. So how have you engaged managers? Has it really been on a tactical basis, like you are moving locations exactly 1 month from today, and here's what you're going to need to do in order to change locations? Or are you really getting at understanding what those managers need? Supervisors, so lower level management, line supervisors, especially for hourly or union-based employees, how are their issues different than managers and senior leaders? Have you talked with them about what specifically they need and are concerned about? And lastly, employees. What are the fears of the employees? What are they going to lose? What are they afraid that they're not going to be able to handle or manage? And how are you going to very strategically both identify and understand their fears, but then also build a strategy to address them? The other thing you should be considering is who are all of the other organizations, the other departments, the other people cross-functionally that you would be wise to be engaging. So what does the learning and development team have in the way of current resources in terms of what they've got on their plate strategically over the next year or two? What do they have going on so that you can start to engage them and their plans in supporting your efforts? Have you signed off with legal? You may have. But what about organizational development or diversity and inclusion or facilities management? How are you reaching across the silos, those walls, to really understand what perspective they bring and how you can be anticipating potential issues around the lack of utilization or resistance that they can help you really overcome? What I'd suggest to you is a different model, the model of permeable walls, right? So rather than having silos and very hard definitions of functional differences, how can you be thinking about how IT and real estate and HR can be working together? You're always going to be coming from your perspective, from your own set of metrics, from your own set of beliefs and challenges and your senior leader and how on board they are with the initiative. What can you do to start soften those barriers? What can you do to go into a situation with real estate, for example, if you're in HR, and say, you know what, I don't exactly know what you do. I'm not exactly sure how you're judged in terms of the metrics for your success on this project, but I know I've got something to offer here, so I would love to work with you. Now, if you think I'm completely crazy and being pie in the sky, you might suggest via chat, how have you successfully engaged these other departments in having these conversations? How have you successfully managed an HR lead who, after finding out that you're embarking on this transformational journey, has expressed interest or concern about not being involved? So if we start to understand that we are all going to come from our own perspective, but we need to be working collaboratively, I'd suggest then the place to start from a collaborative perspective is to build a communication plan. And I would suggest to you that there are 4 aspects of communication, 4 areas of communication that I think that you really need to be focused on. And as we go through these, some of these are going to be like, well, yeah, duh, I'm already doing that. And some of these may be new for you. So again, as we're going through, if you'd like to share in chat some of your ideas, I know we would all like to be able to learn from each other, so I hope that you will share that information in chat. So the 4 areas that I would suggest you focus on in building a communication plan to get the people-related aspects included in the actual logistical and tactical aspects of your change are these. First, what is the information that everybody needs to know about the change that is underway? Second, what are the tools that are available and how to use them? Not just tools in your own functional area, but tools across the board. Tools, like I was saying earlier in L&D, where that they might have some soft skills videos that might be really beneficial to managers who are going through this change. So what tools are available and how can they use them? Going back to that buffet story I was telling you. The third area to focus on in terms of building a communication strategy is around the behavioral changes and skills development that are going to be required to break down resistance and to build support and mastery of some of the new competencies that managers are going to need as they're managing dispersed teams, as they're thinking about everybody mobility efforts across an entire campus. What are those skills that managers may or may not have, and how are you going to make sure that they get that? And the last is the idea of team alignment and planning. So if you think about the tactical information that needs to be communicated, then you think about the skill sets that people in your organization are going to need, then there's this thing called team. There is this department or function or group of people who work together, who are now going to have to work together in a brand new way. So are you thinking about those, what we used to call team dynamics, that engagement among team members and how that may be at risk or feel at risk for those individuals? So I'm going to take you through in a little bit more detail each one of these 4 aspects. What I would suggest to you is that at this point, if you're not in HR, you might be thinking seriously, like, I have enough that I need to communicate just about the tactical or logistical aspects of what I do, and I am not HR. I don't have to deal with behaviors, and I don't have to deal with team dynamics and whether managers are skilled. And I would suggest to you that, yes, you're right. From a functional perspective, that's not your role. But I would suggest from the overall success of your program and to serve the needs of your organization as a whole, I would encourage you to recognize, A, that this aspect of change management is important, and B, then to encourage you to reach out to the people in the organization who do have this subject matter expertise so that you can work together to build the plan. So what is the information about the change itself that I think really needs to be focused on? First of all, who's behind it? Depending on the safety and security concerns of the individuals in your organization, this is going to be more or less important. For some organizations, sticking your neck out is, can be perceived as, potential career suicide. So if I really am going to embrace mobility, am I going to get fired? Am I going to get in trouble? In those very risk-averse organizations, managers, leaders, even peer leaders, senior leaders, need to know who is behind it and who supports it so they know that they can get on board. What is the positive impact for the organization? Is there a mission that you can organize your transformational effort around so that you can be touting the positive benefit for the organization as a whole? And then more specifically for that individual that you're communicating with, the employee, the senior leader, the supervisor, the manager, what's in it for them? Because it's one thing to say, well, we're looking at cutting out, $50 million from our real estate footprint over the next 5 years, but what does that mean to me personally? Why should I buy in? What are the timelines and schedules for the transformation? What are the logistics of the systems and tools? So where are the lockers? How are we going to utilize lockers? What is the hoteling software and how are we going to use it? So what's going to be available? And then I would also strongly encourage you, if you haven't done it yet, to create one primary location for all of that information. That seems so basic, and yet we work with organizations where they're like, well, we have all the information, but some of it's on the employee benefits site, and some of it's on the workforce initiative, transformation initiative site, but, well, we don't really use these pages, right? So even if you have a location, are you maximizing the use of that location? So then number 2, moving on to tools. So what are the tools, and not just what is the buffet, but how do you use them? What happens, not only getting people trained on it, but creative ways of using some of this technology, especially in the areas of things like web conferencing, IM, and others. We do a lot of training with managers around what is the IM etiquette that you're going to use. How are you going to use web conferencing to have fun and build teams at the beginning of every one of your meetings? Not just how do you sign in, how do you make sure that you can troubleshoot if nobody can hear you, that kind of stuff. We've got to move far beyond. Some organizations actually make managers practice building their, setting up their home office in the office before they go. Okay, that's great, but then what are the rules around availability of IT? Are there other tools that need to be made available? Do you know what tools your employees would really, really like to have? And are you communicating the schedule that you're following to get those tools out to them? The third area then is individual skills, competencies, and behaviors. So this is interesting to me. We've trained managers for years now on what we call managing people you can't see. So it's these areas of managing performance and communicating and team building in dispersed or remote teams. But what we're finding all of a sudden is that organizations are kind of going back to the basics. They're realizing that if their management overall doesn't have the skills, if they were never trained in basic management skills or leadership skills, then making a big transformational change around how people are going to work causes all kinds of issues because those managers don't necessarily have the skills they need. So what are you doing? What is your organization? Again, if you're not in HR or OD, what is your organization doing as a whole to address a potential gap in leadership and management skills, this issue of building trust around within a team, managing performance? Are there even job descriptions? Are there metrics tied to their objectives? And how are managers managing performance? Providing feedback and having difficult conversations. Is your organization starting to hire for technical competence? Are you starting to recognize that you should only be bringing people in who are comfortable or who have some experience with working remotely or working in a mobile culture? So what are the requirements for your organization around that? And then optimizing technology for teams. It goes back to what I was saying. Are there creative sharing opportunities for individuals to be talking about, oh my gosh, you know, we did a virtual book club and it was awesome, and here's the technology we used, and here's how it worked, and we were really excited about the results. Where is that sharing around how to use the technology, like the Microsoft Innovation leader was talking about, in creative ways? Where is that being communicated? The last area is really around this issue of team dynamics. The diagram here is really an identification of 8 different aspects of what we call team life that change or can be impacted when people start to work in new and creative ways, whether that's mobility on campus, whether it's working remotely or working flexibly. And so we've actually taken teams through these different 8 aspects to help managers start to think about what are the ways that we need to organize ourselves so that we are not making assumptions about behaviors, so that we are very clearly monitoring capacity even though we can't see each other working. What we have found is in a study that's going to be released this fall, actually, in conjunction with Career Life Alliance Services and Boston College Center for Work and Family. The 3 of us did a study. Like I said, the results will be released this fall. And what we found was by taking the team through these 8 different aspects and having them have a conversation about it, what we do is we actually engage the managers and their teams to build a plan around how is the team going to function to make sure that no one's burning out, or if you have too much on your plate, that you're easily communicating it. How are we going to make sure that we're not losing the day-to-day connection of saying good morning every day when we walk in, because that's an important value of our teams. So by taking a team, training managers on how to take their teams through this planning process, we replace the rug that we pulled out from under them with this workplace transformation project. So what we have found is that in the process of taking teams through this, they actually accomplished a couple of different things. They found that those aspects of team life, so if you look at the graph on the left-hand side, the aspects of team life around communicating, interacting, connecting, using technology, and understanding performance goals, all of the managers that we surveyed who'd gone through it said that they actually felt like those things had improved as a result of planning when they were managing dispersed or remote or flexible teams. If you look over on the right-hand side, those 2 bars, managers' understanding and comfort in discussing flexibility also improved. So if you think about it, by embracing the people side of the transformation, you notice the resistance starts to go down, right? That managers start to become more comfortable. And what was really interesting to us as researchers was that productivity and customer service, those 2 littler bars, that managers believed that productivity and customer service had actually improved as a result of planning out how teams were going to interact, what the expectations were, how they were all going to make sure that they were being accountable to each other, even though they might not see each other every day. So managers felt better equipped to improve team communication and interaction. They saw improvements in productivity and customer service. And actually, and it's not shown on this graph, but employees were actually less likely to leave the organization now or when economic conditions improved. So again, this idea of embracing the changing dynamics of the team as part of the transformation process actually made a big difference. And I would suggest to you that you think about taking some sort of approach around how is the team, not just the individual, but how is the team going to operate once we've transformed our workplace. Then if you think about those 4 aspects of communication, then what we've done is created a training model. And there's a lot on this slide, but I'll just kind of take you through the 4 different levels. A training approach then to start to address those 4 different aspects of communication that we were talking about. So this first level is really the introduction to your transformation effort. So what is the business case? All of that stuff that I was talking about is really important. Who's on board? What is this going to look like for you? What's in it for you? How do you handle the process of either approving a flexible request or saying yes to moving your whole team to a new location or to being completely virtual? This level 2 then is basic skills training. So again, what are the leadership and management skills that your managers and supervisors and even senior leaders are going to need to embrace this change? The third level is that team-based approach that we were talking about. And then this fourth level is ultimately, at the end of the day, you want to be building all these competencies into your overall leadership training program and approach so that managing in these transformational ways is just part of the expectation of every manager and leader in your organization. So when you think about, okay, how are we going to communicate all this information? There's a ton of stuff here. I'd suggest a mix of different communication approaches. So sometimes it's going to need to be in person, right? Sometimes it's going to need to be electronic, especially if you're communicating to a lot of people in lots of locations. But are there some things you can be doing in terms of creating videos and photo walls that can be accessible remotely so that it isn't just a matter of, standing by the elevator and seeing what video, seeing the video wall and what's coming up? How can you translate that to people who are not necessarily in your headquarters? And then what is training going to look like, right? So some of this information needs to be communicated in informal ways, sometimes written, sometimes spoken. What actually needs to be boiled down into training, and what is that training approach going to be? And then equally important, and something that we as researchers of this study found was really lacking in a lot of cases, is creating a place and a space for the individuals who have gone through this transformation to talk, to share best practices, and really, ultimately for you, sing the praises of this transformational effort. Like, hey, don't be afraid, this worked out great, and here are some of the cool things we're doing. So when you look at your effort, are you creating spaces and places for all of these different aspects of communication? So as we wrap up here, because I want to make sure we have time for questions, and if you haven't typed in a question into the Q&A, I would encourage you to do that, because we're going to leave a good 15 minutes for questions. I want to make sure we have time to interact and that I can help you with some individual specifics. But really what I'd like to leave you with today is one very specific action, which is based on the information we've talked about. Do yourself a favor and build out a 2 to 3 year strategic communication plan for your workplace transformation effort. So even if you launched your effort a couple years ago, I bet you there's some stuff in here that you could still be really focused on. It's never too late to build a plan. And I would also then recommend that that plan isn't just built, in the ether, that it really should be based on gaps that you have identified, your leadership has identified, management has identified, some of your cross-functional partners may have identified, in understanding of the program, of the skills that are required to be successful going forward, the culture of your organization. The communication plan you build is going to be fundamentally different for each one of you based on the culture of your organization. So some of you may be in very risk-averse agencies within the government, and so the way you approach communication may look very different than, a tech company in Silicon Valley that's a couple years old. So understanding what is possible and what the appetite for communication is in your organization is going to be key. I think the other important thing is what is the feedback system you have for gathering this information, right? So do you have a way of getting at identifying those gaps, either through focus groups or interviews or through surveys? Are there other parts of the organization that are running surveys, an engagement survey, for example, where you might be in IT, but if you could at least understand where the breakdowns are in engagement, maybe there's a role that you can play, or in real estate as well. If you know that individuals in your organization are really stressed out, what does that do to the messaging and the approach that you're going to take toward communication? The other really important thing is when you're thinking about building the plan, each one of you is in charge of a particular area. So rather than just building the plan out based on the silo that you're in, reach out to others and figure out what are the needs from them. What are their communication needs, and how can you work together to meet multiple functional goals? Then, again, depending on the culture of your organization, in some organizations you're going to want to socialize this plan for quite a while, getting lots of feedback and making sure that everybody that needs to be covered off is before you launch it. For other organizations, especially smaller ones that might be on the call today, you might just need to kind of put a draft together, walk into your leader and say, hey, what do you think? And then you're off to the races. So in whatever way makes sense, make sure that not just the decision maker in your organization is covered off, but that key stakeholders are also brought into the loop. And then, just as I brought up earlier in this webinar, the other really important thing is to be building a feedback loop, to be consistently adjusting your plan and demonstrating its effectiveness back up to the leaders who have supported the plan. So in other words, if you have put this 2 to 3 year plan in place and you realize at the end of year one that managing performances is a really hot button issue, then how does that need to impact your plan going forward? Similarly, when you've had some really great wins, how are you building that loop back so that everyone in your organization, especially the key stakeholders, know that you're being successful? There are a number of benefits that you'll end up achieving as a result of being willing to embrace the people-driven change management approach that we've talked about today. I think at the end of the day, what you're going to find, and certainly what some of the data that we shared with you showed, was that managers, supervisors, leaders, and employees are all going to start to lower their barriers of concern and their risk aversion if they understand what's going on, why it's going on, and what is in it for them, both in terms of the long-term benefits and impact to their organization, but also for their own ability to grow professionally and to secure and solidify relationships with their team members. I think the other piece of it is then that you build demand for your program. So many of you may be in a situation where you go, really, I feel like I'm communicating everything I possibly can out to people and I still don't have the buy-in. Is your communication strategy more of a push strategy? Here's what we have. Here's the buffet. What are you going to do about it? Or are you really building pockets of strong support and best practice that you can be sharing with others so that they're drawn into your effort rather than feeling like, okay, we're the next ones on the rollout schedule, so I guess we're going to jump off the cliff together. In closing, I'd just like to share with you, back to the CIO story of speaking to the law firms. I understand that this is a challenge, and I understand the value of building a plan, a longer-term plan, so that you can be managing the fires and the issues on a day-to-day basis while being able to at least keep the end game in mind. So the story I would share with you about that is as we were talking about workplace transformation, me with this group of CIOs, one of the CIOs all of a sudden in the middle of it, jumps up and he's like, wait a minute, I can't believe we're talking about transformation. How can I be focused on this big, important, strategic stuff when what I really have to deal with is this? And we're all like, okay, what is going on? I mean, he was very animated and disruptive. And he said, I just got an email from one of my partners in the firm who is concerned because the webcam in his home is not working. And that webcam is the only way he knows that his baby parrot is staying alive, because he's working so many hours in the office that he can't get home to take care of the baby parrot as often as he would like. He said, how can I focus on transformation when what I need to worry about is a bird cam? So I hope that I've been able to help you think through some ways to be a little bit more strategic, to be able to think about building a plan that will help you stay on track even when things like bird cams break down and you've got fires like that to put out. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand the presenter ball back to Doug. And Doug, I wondered if you had any questions for me at this point.
Well, we've got quite a few questions queued up. I'm hesitant to take us off the parrot picture though. So for those of you who haven't typed in your question yet, now's a good time to use the Q&A facility. It should be still on the right-hand side of your screen there. Just type in your question, make sure that it's aimed at the panelists. We'll be taking those questions as they've come in. The earliest one we have here, how long before any big change should you begin some kind of communication or strategic communication program?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I recently had a business leader say, well, our lease is up in 3 years. Do we have enough time to work on a transformation effort? And I kind of chuckled to myself. I'm like, yeah, I think 3 years will be plenty. I think it needs to start with the idea of not letting secrets get out of the boardroom or out of your president or CEO's office in a way that creates concern and gossip in a way that starts right out of the gate building insecurity. So I would say the minute that there is convergence of thought or agreement from your leadership that you are going to do something, I think it's important to at least make it clear that it's something that you're looking into. So that if word gets out or whispering kind of, happens in the office like it often does, that there will be someone in the know to say, oh, no, this is just part of fill in the blank. So I think the minute there's the potential for something to start to leak out, you should start to communicate, even if it's in very informal ways. And Doug, I know we've got a lot of questions that I want to get to, but the one thing I do want to, the myth I want to debunk is that a lot of times people will say, well, I don't want to ask our employees or talk about it with our employees because if they have suggestions, we're going to feel obligated to respond to them all. And that's really not the case. Employees don't expect that. Managers don't expect that. They just want to feel respected and that they're in the know so that they're not in the dark.
Gotcha. And I'm actually going to skip ahead to a couple of questions here because it's very closely related. You talked about a bunch of different channels of communications and different things that you might communicate. I think this question is appropriate there. How often should you be communicating to everybody, whether or not it's goals, policies, metrics? I guess they're asking there, what's the frequency that you want to communicate these different kinds of things?
Yeah, I think, again, that's going to be specific to your culture. I think what's important is that there is some place where if questions come up, there's a central repository of information somewhere in your organization. It can be written. It can be on a wiki if you're in a small organization, or it can be an actually built out, much more fancy site. So I think there needs to be a place ongoing where people can access information. In terms of the appetite for communication, I think there needs to be a steady stream of it, right? So you don't want to just do a big launch where there's a lot of information out there for a month or two, and then you go radio silent until the first wave of, relocation starts happening. So I think, a slow, steady, consistent diet is important, so that may be once a week. It might be twice a month. Again, depending on the communication style of your organization. I would also really encourage you not to be the only one who's ever sending out the communication. To the extent that you can ghostwrite communication for various leaders to be communicating, then it makes it feel like it's a whole workplace effort and not just an effort that resides within your function.
So let me make sure I understand what you just said there. It sounds like you're providing a lot of communication about the program, metrics, successes, but that last bit it sounded like you're also providing templates or pre-written materials for the company leadership, the local leaders to deliver in certain circumstances or with a certain frequency as it's coming from them?
So to have a nice range of communications is important. So real estate might issue an email or some sort of communication around the physical location changes that are happening, or IT might announce the new hoteling software that you have out there and how it's going to work. But then you also want to be layering that with senior leaders talking at a town hall meeting, or having department level meetings where all of the leaders have talking points where they're out there. So there's going to be different layers of communication that should all be happening, so that's what's going to feed everybody, that kind of steady diet of communication.
That sounds great. We've got 3 different questions all revolving around the feedback that you were talking about, so I'm going to try and wrap those into just a pair of questions here. One of them is this feedback that you're getting, who should be reviewing it? Is it viewed publicly or just within the steering committee? And then the other type of question on this would be, can you give some examples of that feedback loop? Is it a survey? What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So there's 2 kinds of feedback that I think are really important. One is feedback from the people that are working in your organization about how things are going. So that can be through a survey or through focus groups or through interviews. It can happen and should happen before you even launch the program, so that you understand what are the concerns and the needs. Where do they feel that skills are lacking, et cetera, et cetera. Then be checking in with, let's say, a group that moved to an open collaborative work environment. Okay, how's it going? Where are the concerns? What are the issues? And then again, 3 months later and 6 months later, to be creating that ongoing data stream so that you understand the impact of the individuals who are going through that change, and where you have opportunities to shore things up before they explode on you. The other piece of feedback is to make sure that you schedule regular touch-base meetings with your senior leader or leaders, your management committee, however your leadership is structured, so that you get the buy-in, let's say, right out of the gate, and then you say, 3 months from now, we want to come back to you and we want to talk to you about the results of your survey. 3 months later, we want to talk to you about the implementation plan and your role in the implementation plan. A month later, we're going to give you talking points so that you're engaging leadership and not just saying yes, but taking ownership of it throughout the process.
Wonderful. There's a great question here. I bet you're going to have some good answers for this. Looks like we're asking, do you have a book you can recommend on change management?
Yeah, so I was asked early on what change management philosophy do you subscribe to? I was like, you know what? I like the Heath brothers because it's a really, really straightforward approach to change management called Switch. So Chip Heath and Dan Heath wrote a book called Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And it is just a very fast read, very easy way of thinking differently about how to get change, especially creating that pull strategy instead of the push strategy. The other one, if you're feeling a little weary right now as a result of your transformational efforts, that I would recommend is Seth Godin's The Dip. It's a book I read in about a little over an hour, and I'm a slow reader, in my local library a couple years ago. And it just basically reminds us all that change is hard, and that after the excitement of implementation or initial rollout is done, that we all get into this dip where you start to question, why on earth did we even do this, because it's gotten pretty hard. So those are the 2 that I would recommend, and they're both quick, easy reads.
Terrific. Our next question is actually from Naomi Stanford, one of our recent speakers, and she's asking, do you find that national cultures need different approaches to the transformation activities?
Yeah. What I assume you mean is from different countries?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so absolutely, because they're both the cultural norms around change are going to be different, and also the acceptable responses by those individuals within an organization, within a country, are also going to be different. So in some cultures, the concerns or resistance that some individuals may feel may not be appropriately culturally expressed. And so you may need to get really creative about how you're going to get feedback from individuals who feel, for example, that they really need to be going along in a yes man kind of approach to your change. So getting feet on the ground and understanding how best within that culture to get honest, open feedback and dialogue going in whatever way that needs to be is going to be really, really important to helping you be successful.
Perfect. The next question here is terribly interesting. We've had this come up numerous times. And the question is, management seems to be pushing us too quickly to cut space or cutting space too quickly. How do you slow down the process so that you can be more strategic and do this at an appropriate pace?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is happening because of the hard cost that can be saved. I mean, there's real money really quickly that can be gained by making this change quickly. I think one thing is benchmarking. So who in your industry or among your peers do you have stories, cautionary tales, that you can be sharing with leadership around what happens, especially if you can make the case that it will cost you more money down the road. So that's where you might call on your HR folks to find out, what is the cost of turnover by losing X number of people, if that, for example, was the case study that you heard from a peer. I think, so matching dollar savings with costs can help. I think the other thing is to be very cross-functional in your approach to your response to your leadership around making this change. If they only see it as a real estate reduction and they don't see the impact, the cross-functional needs of the organization, the cost in IT infrastructure, the cost in training and some of those things, then they're not going to be making the best, most educated decision about that timeline. So if you could see your role as really being kind of the Pied Piper of how this is much more complicated and then you may be thinking, and enlist some of your peers to help make that case, I think you may be able to slow that down a little bit.
Terrific. I definitely identify with the first part of your answer there. We found that a large number of practitioners are taking advantage of the kind of community events, the one we put on as a user group for our customers, where they're asking those kinds of questions back and forth. How long does it take you to do this? What's the risks of these kinds of things? So definitely appreciate the ask your peers there. We are at 1:59, so I think we've only got time for one more question here. Those of you who haven't asked a question yet, who still want to ask one, please put it in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to pass this along to Kyra and see if we can't get some more answers. So the final one here sounds fairly tactical, but something I'm sure everybody's hit a lot. When we encounter resistance from a local leader, what's the best path for getting them on board? Is it more important to solve the problem quickly or solve it for the long term? What's your experience?
Yeah, so what I would suggest is not to get into the situation in the first place, right? So by making sure that you have gotten a clear understanding before you get into it about what each one of those senior leaders' concerns are, and anticipating that, helping them understand that they've been heard, the more likely it is going to be that you don't end up in that situation. That said, in every organization, in every transformational effort, there's at least one. I think what becomes important is whether you have the political capital to go to that individual to have a conversation about what's really going on here, or whether you need to enlist a sponsor or someone at a higher level than you to engage in that conversation, or whether you just play through it. In some cases, senior leaders of a particular location are going to balk at something, but at the end of the day, they're more bark than bite, and they'll just go along. They just want to be heard. I think to the extent that there really needs to be an engagement of that individual, I think it's really important to listen to what their concerns are, recognize and acknowledge their concerns, and build a plan with them to get that met if it's at all possible, and to slow it down if need be, maybe move them to farther down in the implementation cycle if it looks like you're going to need more time to get them on board.
That sounds like extraordinarily good advice. And we are at time. So, Kyra, we want to thank you all for taking your time to share with us and sharing your experience and knowledge. Everybody on the call today, thanks so much for attending, especially for sharing the different experiences you had, as Kyra asked early on. I think that was really interesting. LifeMeetsWork.com is also the place where you can find more information and resources, and a great way to get a hold of Kyra. So make sure you take a visit there and explore the site a bit so you get a better idea of what's available from them. And then in October, we're going to be hearing from Martha Johnson. I'm sure you all recognize her name. She's going to be sharing with us how she was able to leverage really big culture change within large organizations, specifically within the 2 government agencies that she was leading. So again, thank you, Kyra, so much. We want to appreciate everybody for spending the last hour with us, and keep an eye on your inbox for the details on the next AgilQuest Agile Workplace Leaders Series. Thanks again, and have a great day.